This is the Better Ottawa Municipal Panel. Today is Monday, November the 24th. My name is Neil Saravanamutu. I am joined by Joanne Chianello and John Willing. Hello to you both.
Good
Happy Black
morning.
Friday week. Happy Black Friday week. I hear the
The
city's
whole
in the
week.
market trying to get us a good deal on a landfill. I guess we'll talk about that, huh?
Yeah, you think there might be one for sale on Amazon?
Yeah.
Maybe. Good.
I'm coming to you from my parents' basement in Etobicoke, beautiful Toronto suburb. I actually love this wood paneling. Again, as I always do on the podcast, I age myself by saying it's a very Wayne's World kind of thing, recording in your mom's basement. So that is where I am today.
We're not worthy, Joanne. We're not worthy.
Well said. Okay, listen, we are recording a few days later than we normally do. Normally we record on Fridays. There was an important discussion at City Hall on Friday, and that's why we've delayed a few days. We will be talking about that. That's about a landfill site. However, we want to first get back to budget because this is budget month at the City of Ottawa, and we will be covering all of the different committees that come forward with their budgets, or at least those that have something exceptional to talk about. We'll be covering those over the next few weeks. And so let's get us started with the police budget. Now, Joanne, the police budget came out and we were told that our taxes will go up by 5% to pay for the police budget. But is that what's happening here? Like, is the police budget only going up by 5%?
No, it never really does, right? And so the 5% is the tax levy. So it's not the whole, your property taxes aren't going up 5%, but the part that you pay for your taxes, the specific levy that's built into that 3.75 tax increase, that's 5%. But that's not actually what's going up. It's going up more like almost 9%, 8.5, like 8.7%. So here's how it breaks down. The total police budget increase is $31.5 million. Now, I know that the police keep saying it's $26 million, but in fact, they are not counting some of the money. I will explain that in a minute. So here's where that $31.5 million comes from. $18 million, that's your 5% tax levy increase. But you're also getting the city is assigning $2 million from PILTs. We love PILTs on this show. These are property in lieu of tax.
Yes,
Payments in lieu of taxes.
Yes.
That's what the P stands for. And these are this is money that other levels of government do not pay property taxes, so they give us some money through a very complex and sometimes controversial process. So $2 million of those are getting assigned to the police. So that's you're up to $20 million. And then they get part of what's called assessment growth. So every year, as we're building more homes, we're not building enough apparently, but we still build more homes. As those homes come onto the property tax roll, they start to actually, the people who own those properties pay taxes. That's called assessment growth. And that's new money that's coming in. The police are getting $5.7 million of that. So that takes you up to about 26 million. Yeah. And then the city has given police $5.4 million of tax stabilization money. This is a reserve fund that the city has. It's very large right now, larger than it's ever been. I don't know why it's that big, but this is basically it's to stabilize the taxes. So the taxes don't go crazily up and down every year. And it's often for one-time things, so that say you have a big expense some year, you can get it from this fund so that the taxes don't have to be really high one year and then you're trying to lower them. The $5.4 million in tax stabilization reserve, they're going to things like strategic projects, like when you're onboarding police officers, training, to the body cams, to pilot new technologies. I am not sure those are really one-time expenses. I do wonder if the tax stabilization money is being used to artificially keep that the tax increase lower, because I know police are saying we can do this, but this is not sustainable for us. And so overall, that's a long answer to your short question. Is it really 5%? No, it is really 8.7%. And the police are looking for an extra $31.5 million in 2026.
Okay, John, well, on that point of this tax stabilization, I mean, that's kind of like a buffer fund, right? In a sense, that when these exceptional expenses come up, the one-time expenses, as you mentioned, Joanne. I mean, John, like, how do we interpret this? Because we know that most of the police budget is salaries, right? And clearly those are not a one-time expense. So are we going to have this same issue to deal with in a year's time?
Well, I think like the police budget's always a wild card. The tax stabilization fund, Joanne did a great job describing it. It's like really to keep taxes, I'm going to put air quotes, low or lower than what they could be. And the police recognize in their budget report that, look, this is a risk actually using this fund because you rely on it for 1 year. And then presumably in 2027, it won't be available to you, right? The police budget's always a wild card. It's almost like snowplowing in the city. You don't know what's going to happen every winter. And the same kind of could be said about policing. You don't know what kind of, knock on wood, but major crime that could happen. Demonstrations in the capital are always a thing. You don't know what's going to pop up in the political calendar over the next 12 months or just around the streets of downtown Ottawa or anywhere else for that matter. So you always take a kind of a flyer on the budget. The police have a new district model that they talk about that they're putting into place next year. So you don't know the actual cost. They have a plan for it, but you don't know the actual costs that are going to wash out on that at the end of 2026. They're building a new police station in the south end. So there's a major capital project happening there. So you don't know if, who knows, there will be surprise costs on that. I know the police department has some new requirements under provincial policing legislation too, that they talk about in the budget report, saying these are unknown final costs that are going to be in the budget. So there's a lot of actually risks and unknowns in the budget. And when you talk about the tax stabilization money, yeah, you know what? It's in a healthy spot for the city right now. So I guess it makes it easier to give the police some money, but you really don't want to bake that in. And you can't bake that in when you look ahead to 2027. And the police, I know they're looking at a long range financial plan, which is great. Credit to the OPS. But they really have to find out a way to find some sustainability. I will say this one thing. I do like some of the stuff in the police budget when it comes to using more special constables. This is something that's been talked about for years. How can we get full badge officers off of some work and use what are a little bit cheaper special constables in some work? And they're actually talking about, it looks like, investigative units like fraud. Certainly, I think it's been talked about in traffic work before. So I think that kind of thinking within the police service, I don't know how it plays in the union, but I think the police are really trying to think about how can we use our resources a little bit more efficiently and save a little bit money by the end of the budget years too.
That's really interesting.
And I want to just point out, if people are interested in this, aside from if you think, how much you should fund police or not, or grow the service, I have to give some kudos to Steve Bell, who used to be the deputy chief, who's the administrator now. Really excellent report. Like I've covered those for a long time, but like if you actually read the budget report, it has a lot of details of what they're planning to do and what their issues are. I think more so than other years. And I think it was if you want to understand, everything people are doing, or like how many people are hired in different jobs, it is very fulsome. And I think it gave a much better idea than what's happening in other departments, I think, that report. So it's worth a look if you're interested in what police are talking about.
Yeah. John, I wasn't aware of that point about special constables that because OC Transpo, that was the solution for OC Transpo too, right? For the fare inspectors, these were special constables, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, they deputize them essentially.
And also too, like if you're working on fraud and you need a bunch of computer experts, do they really have to go through basic training at police college to do that? Like, I think we have to think a little bit differently about how we want to deal with modern crime.
Yeah, and you're saying that the pay scale is they're two separate things. The sworn officers versus the special constables.
Yeah. And again, this is something the police been trying to figure out how to do this. You think about all the things that requires policing in the city. Think about just the courthouse. If you've ever been down to the courthouse, there are police there for security like that. Can that work be done by special constables? And I find it interesting, like I said, and also traffic, absolutely. And also, the report talks about hospitals too, because sometimes you need police at hospitals, perhaps to guard a suspect, that kind of stuff. But I find it really interesting. They're talking about actually investigative units, cybercrime, as Joanne mentioned, and fraud too. So we'll see where that goes in 2026. Yeah. Okay. So I just want to end this discussion coming back to your original point, Joanne, which is, we're using $5 million of tax stabilization money, this one-time money. And what we're all saying is that this is likely a recurring expense, and so maybe it's inappropriate. So it does, I just want to re-emphasize the point that you made around, is this just, a ploy to keep the number down, right? Like 5% for police, which then feeds into the overall tax increase number of 3.75%.
And to be honest, I think that's probably the explanation, because, you know, if you imagine if we had given, like, put that 5 million straight into the police levy that taxpayers are paying. So then you end up with like 5.1% or
It
whatever
would
it
actually
is.
have been 6.5, right? Like it's actually the same. I'm like, so remember back at the budget directions,
Yeah.
they said the police levy will be anywhere increased from 5% to 6.5%. If you look at it, it's actually the money that it is actually the equivalent of about 6.5%, but they're doing it, well, okay, we'll give you the money that you asked for, but not all in your base budget. We're going to give some of it to
Yeah.
you in a one-time
Okay.
thing. So next year we'll be having the same discussion again, which
Yeah.
Steve Bell talked about. He's like, okay. And Chief
Yeah.
Stubbs, same thing. They're like,
Well,
it's not
yeah, and you
fixing
know
the
what? I
problem.
can't help but feeling a little cynical about this, because it all drives that 3.75% number. And if you had included it, would that take you to like 3.8 or whatever? And then
Or
suddenly
four
you're
or something.
doesn't
Yeah,
look quite so
exactly.
pretty.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's silly, actually. But
Okay. All right. Well, let's turn to the other issue, the topic that was discussed on Friday at City Committee, which was around the opportunity for a acquisition of a landfill site. Now, you'll remember that we've been going through some thinking at the city about how do we deal with the fact that the Trail Road dump is going to fill up sometime fairly soon. Different scenarios about when that would actually happen and what sort of measures we take, but in the foreseeable future. And so we need a plan B. And back in June, there was a significant discussion at committee about different options. Now, one of those options was to build a new landfill site. And what has popped up on the radar and has been discussed at committee on Friday was that there's a possibility to acquire a new landfill site at Boundary Road and Highway 417. So if you know, in the East End, if you know where that Amazon distribution facility is, it's very close to there. In fact, sort of almost wrapped right around it. So John, I want to start with you. And so what's going on here? This is property that's owned by Taggart and Miller Waste Systems. Is this an actual functioning dump?
They haven't started bringing trash in. They haven't really moved on the operational part of it, but they've got all the permissions, right? And so when you have all the provincial permissions there, they have the land, it's ready to go to be a waste facility, essentially. They, for whatever reason, and we can speculate on the pod about why they haven't.
That's why we have this pod, for
right?
wild speculation.
Well, the question was asked to Alan Gontier, who is in charge of the was he in charge of the waste file? I guess falls under him at the city, and he was asked during the committee, "Why do you think this is happening?" And he even said, "Well, I had some ideas, but not based in fact." So a lot of people have some ideas about why Taggart Miller, which is a partnership between those two companies that moved on this property back in 2012, I think it goes back to now, if I remember correctly.
They started buying it, but they got their environmental assessment in 2017. So it's actually like they've not constructed anything, even though they could have. Like they could have moved ahead since then, right?
And I should
8
say,
years.
like, it's been on the radar for. It's not like this just all of a sudden has popped on the city's radar. Like this is something that was a hot news item back in 2012 when they started going through with the permitting process. It still is obviously a big deal in the East End. People who live in the Carlsbad Springs area. I think about Councillor Skelski, who hasn't even been in a year in office, and she's got some of the hottest files in the city. It reminds me just quickly, guys, of when Jenna Sudds, who's an MP now, was elected to city council, and weeks later, she was faced with an application to tear up a golf course in her ward to build a new infill community. Right? We know that is the Canada Golf and Country Club issue. So Councillor Skalski has a Taywin file. She's got now a dump file, which is probably even hotter in a way. And so lots of stuff going on for her.
Thank you, Taggart, for all these ordinance.
John, I would say baptism by fire, but actually, Joanne, I want to turn to you and say, but maybe that's not the right analogy, because when we go back to the previous discussion, there was talk of an incinerator to deal with our waste issues, and now we're talking about a landfill. Do you think if the city were to go ahead with this proposal, would that mean the end of the option for incineration?
Yeah, I don't know. Like we're kind of jumping all over the place because this thing, part of the big surprise was this came out like a week ago, and they're like, by the way, world, the city has been working on a proposal to buy a dump. Actually, that's not true. We're not buying a dump. We're buying land for a possible dump, right? And so And I think the staff is gleeful. When you read the report, like, it is glowing. You're like, it cannot be overstated how rare and fantastic it is for this situation. Yes, it would be a landfill for sure. It does not have any approvals for an incinerator on this land. It can take up to 450,000 tons of garbage at this site, which is about what Trail Road gets, I think, once a year. So it's kind of on the same volume. And Trail Road, as we know, our existing landfill has, I don't know, about a decade left of expansion or of capacity. Although that number kind of changes from year to year, depending on what's happening in the city. And so, yeah, I think it would be. Now, an incinerator does still need a landfill after that because you have some residual waste. But if we're buying something that large, I would think that we would be moving to a landfill scenario, which is why you heard environmental groups coming to the committee on Friday in favor of this plan. Like, I know people think burning garbage is somehow some kind of I don't know, panacea for our problems. It's terrible. It is terrible. It's much worse for the environment than actually a high-tech landfill. Way worse for it. It burns an enormous amount of energy. Like, the energy it actually emits is, I think, less than the energy it takes to actually start it up. Like, it's terrible for you. So I would think there would be, we're still on the what is it going to cost? We don't know. We have to build it, all that. But so there's a lot of things that we don't know about this plan yet and where they're going. But I do think if the city bought this land with all the permissions, it would be very odd that I would be shocked, to be honest, that we did not end up with the landfill as our next option. To me, I'm happy. And I have to just say on the table, I have a lot of questions about this deal and what the heck's going on, but I prefer that option to any of the other options on the table.
Well, we definitely are jumping all over the map here.
Yes, I know.
But I mean, I think one of the key points is that this proposal really came to public attention very quickly, and it was brought to a committee for discussion so that there could be some public debate about it. So that's great. There was some excellent reporting on this by Kate Porter of CBC.
As always.
And one of the things that Kate pointed out was that this seemed to have come to the city in April. First came to the city in April. And then if you remember, that waste management discussion happened in June. So now it was, the discussions were all under NDA. So they couldn't talk about this specific opportunity at the time. But John, can you just remind?
Weird though, right? Like, staff is talking about it, as John, I think, said, and we were texting about this over the weekend when we're planning the pod. John's like, funny, not funny. Like, there's staff talking about this, but they're the actual staff working on the secret deal to maybe buy the landfill.
Yeah, that's right. Site. That's right. So John, can you talk a little bit about what we know about money here?
Yeah, well, I'm good. And you're right. Like, Kate Porter of CBC had a great story talking about all like the insider kind of stuff leading up to the committee meeting last week. But according to her reporting, she looked in the land registry to see the transactional details. And she figured, based on the 447 hectares that the Taggart Miller Group has assembled, they paid about $8.1 million for the land. So that's significant, because we think that probably the flip to if the city does win this, I guess, the bid, it's probably going to be we think probably six figures. I mean, the city has talked about it would cost $500 million to create a new landfill, like citing
you mean 8 to 9 figures?
Yeah, 9 figures.
Sorry, yes, yeah. 8 to 9. Yeah.
8 to 9 figures.
Yes, good deal. But yeah, so that's kind of just interesting, because that's a nice sum perhaps Taggart Miller might make on the land. We don't know how much they spent on permitting. Back in 2012, they talked about it would be $100 million investment in that property for everything that needed to be done. So okay, that was about $100 million was the number that I know when I talked to Miller. That's how much they were talking about the investment was going to be in the property. Who knows, right? We have no idea.
Did that include construction, John? When you talked to him at the time?
I believe so, but I could be wrong. I don't know. That was 13 years ago too, right? So that's some time ago. So how much will the city pay? I don't know. Hopefully we're going to find out if they win, right? We're going to find out, right? If they win? Yes.
That was what was implied in the committee discussion, that we would eventually find out how much we pay.
Yeah.
I would think so.
The thing that I wonder about is I went back and looked at the discussion from June and looked at the proposal, and when they talk about this landfill option, the costing that they have is somewhere in the like 460. Let me just look. 430 to 760 million dollar range.
Yeah.
So I don't know, 500, 800 million dollars to build this new landfill for land that was purchased for $8 million.
But I think it also depends too, right? Like when they were looking at that, that included everything. That is
Yes,
like
absolutely.
trying to find the land, fighting all of the horrible, like the public outcry of wherever you try to put it, because I don't care, how environmental you are. Nobody wants a dump in your backyard. I include myself in that. Getting the EA approvals, doing the engineering, doing the legal, like that stuff is a long time and a lot of money.
Yes.
And, obviously there's nothing constructed on this site. I think it's just fields as far as I can tell. Right. So,
that's right.
So I'm hoping that we are, the city will have to pay for that.
I mean, it is worth pointing out that to turn a vacant field into a landfill is more complex than people think, right? I mean, it's part of it is a landfill will emit gas, methane, that can then get essentially bottled and sold as what they call renewable natural gas. I mean, it's
give me a can of that.
Yeah. This is it's a bit it's so anyways, but they can turn that excess methane into natural gas that that hopefully replaces the natural gas that people are already using. Mm-hmm. But all of that costs money to build. But there is a very legitimate question about what price we'll pay. Hopefully we were told we will find out what that number is, but whether that's a fair price or not, and who can really say.
I feel like it will not be a fair price, and because also who knows, right? Like I was looking at the environmental assessment from 2017, as one does, and it actually calls for like it's supposed to be that the permissions for that site are for it to be a super high tech, super diverted site. The idea is you have to divert everything. You have to divert construction material, recyclables, organics, everything, and then you can landfill the rest, right? So that might actually, it was a very high bar that was set. It might speak to maybe why Taggart Miller didn't go ahead, because my understanding from other sources outside the city is it's very hard to make money on that. Now, city doesn't have to make money. Also, I wanted to correct something I said in June, and that was that Taggart Miller was waiting for a permission to landfill residential waste. In fact, they got it last year, so I apologize to pod folks. But, and when they did that in 2024, when they asked for that permission, which, by the way, took like 3 months, it seemed to take no time at all, you have to wonder if even then they were thinking, well, we want to at least either take land waste from the city. We want to be able to, accept that, or maybe sell it to a municipality to use it, right? So there's a lot of questions in the EA, what's allowed. There's a lot of questions around that. But still, like, this is a huge opportunity for the city to really get rid of, to deal with a giant political problem. Taggart Miller know this. There's no way we're going to get a good deal on that. We're going to have to pay some kind of premium. I hope it's not insane, but I'm not actually sure what a fair price even is on that. Because, I think it's a very powerful argument to say this is already permitted as a landfill. You can have the city own it, or you can have a private company come in. And then what kind of political pressure do you have on that company to absorb or to implement, for example, the highest environmental standards? If it's a private company, and they have to make money, right? They have to make a profit. My guess is they're going to go for the lowest allowable things at the province. So yeah, I think they kind of have us over a barrel.
And I would underscore the politics part here. This is potentially, guys, one of the most strategic land acquisitions by the city in its history. Next to stuff like LRT, next to the O train and the bridge going over to Gatineau, strategic land acquisitions. We're talking about a dump that would be acrimonious, to say the least, as Joanne said. This takes out a lot of that acrimony by acquiring a landfill site that is already baked in with all the permits. And we talked about the incinerator. We're talking about the incinerator technology right now in 2025. We don't know, in 20 years, who knows where technology is going to go with waste eliminating waste. Essentially, we've gone through the Plasco experience in Ottawa. It seemed like magic technology, and it was kind of interesting until the business case didn't really shake out for it, I guess.
Yeah.
The
But who knows
business
what will
case, the
happen in 20
technology
years?
case didn't work out. It didn't work. That was
No,
one of
not
the
to
problems.
capacity. It was interesting
Yeah.
stuff, though.
You know what? I have two counterpoints that kind of worry me a little bit. Number one is, and I have to say that the public delegations at the committee meeting were absolutely fantastic. Like, I learned so much from the public delegations that weren't even touched on in the staff report, and so did councillors from the questions they were asking too. So kudos to all those delegates that came forward with, in a lot of cases, some very specialized knowledge. One of the delegates said, look, this is all built on laid of clay. We have to be very careful about something like a landfill. If there was an earthquake, it could, basically be disastrous. That's a question that I would like to understand much better. And I think that all I heard from the city manager was that we've done our due diligence. And that was kind of the standard line that kept getting used over. And I just don't have full confidence that that we've explored this issue as fully as we need to. That's point number one. Point number two is when I go back and look at the analysis from June about these 5 options, what was interesting is that of the 5 options, building a new landfill was actually the least preferable of all the 5 options. So it ranked 5 out of 5. Now, I went back and looked at the methodology and tried to kind of reverse engineer the scoring. And by my estimates, if you factor in all of the permitting that has been taken care of for us, that would go from the number 5 option to the number 4 option, so the 4th most preferable option. So the question still remains for me: are we going to just abandon all of that analysis that we did a few months ago because we happen to have this, this opportunity sitting in front of us? Is this really the best way forward for the city if you put aside the politics?
I don't know.
Well, I guess
Good question, Neil.
Well, I think I agree with you on. I would like to see a conditional sale price and then more details on the plan. Like the laid of clay stuff is interesting. Like what actually happens. I mean, people do build things on laid of clay.
Mhm.
The Amazon distribution centers there, the warehouse is there. I think it's built on like pylons and stuff to secure it. So what happens there? Exactly what is the city obligated to build there? Do they have to have a multiple waste diversion site and a landfill? Are they changing it all to landfill? What happens in that case? I think there's a lot of questions actually that need to be answered. And weirdly, the city did not have to actually come to bring that report. So I'm glad they did, but it still has a lot of questions unanswered that I think people are uncomfortable with, and especially people living out there. I feel terrible for them.
And maybe this city doesn't know themselves at this point, guys. Like maybe it's like we have this land, we got to act fast. Obviously, they're at a point where they have to act fast, which is why we had this committee meeting and now a council decision. So I don't think they have all the answers themselves. And so that will be the next question. If we get the land, when are you going to move on actually operationalizing the land? It might not be for years and years. I mean, hopefully we can extend out Trail Road as they usually do, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, good point. Okay, well, listen, there's another aspect of this proposal that I know, Joanne, particularly caught your eye. And that is that, and again, we're grateful to Kate Porter for doing some of the investigation that brought this forward. The lobbyist that brought this to City Hall is with Syntax Strategic. Now, Syntax Strategic is headed up by Jennifer Stewart, who is one of Mark Sutcliffe's campaign chairs or co-chairs in 2022. So I have to ask you, Joanne, the fact that one of the mayor's chief supporters brought this forward, is that of concern to you in any way?
I don't know about concern, but I'm really interested in the files that Syntax and Jennifer Stewart and her senior executive vice president, Jake Enright, have actually been involved in. And I think it's a question of here are the movers and shakers now. We're in the Mark Sutcliffe era. It's very different. And so Jennifer Stewart started her own consulting company, I think at 27. Mark Sutcliffe was one of her, he was a business coach of hers. He went to her 15th anniversary, the firm's anniversary. She's grown it into a firm of 24 people. So it's a big success story for sure. but she's close with Mark Sutcliffe. I think he proclaimed Syntax Strategies Day in June, right? As which companies get all the time, right, for anniversaries, but he spoke at it. They're pretty close. And I know, John, if you remember during the election campaign in 2022, you would go to a press conference and Jennifer was there on the ground helping out with some comm stuff sometimes, right? She was very involved.
Yep.
In fact, when Mark Sutcliffe became the mayor, he didn't really have much staff. That was the story at the time. He didn't bring in his own chief of staff. This is how Robin Guest ended up being staying with him. One of the things he didn't have was a comms person, and so Jennifer Stewart sent her executive vice president, Jake Enright, to be Mark Sutcliffe's comms director. I spoke with him, great guy. He said, I am not staying here full time. He was just there for a few months. So he actually worked in the mayor's office, and now he has been lobbying the mayor's office on a few items, right? I have to say, there's no rules being broken, and he has registered those on the lobby registry. Thank you very much for doing that. And so of the various files, including LRT files, we won't get into that today, but he has the Syntax actually represents Taggart, right? And they lobbied on behalf of Taywin, all of council, and we find out that they now have actually represented Taggart on this file. It was Jake Enright again, went to the mayor's office. Not sure he talked specifically to the mayor, but certainly to his new chief of staff, Matt Gravel, to say, hey, we have this great opportunity for you. We're selling this land. And so I just find it fascinating, like the intricacies, because I think that's the kind of stuff, if you're interested in City Hall and the backroom chat, like these are the details that are very hard to see. It's super interesting. And the other thing that came up, which came out of nowhere for me.
Hold on a sec, Joanne.
Okay.
I want to turn to John for a sec here.
Yes.
And then we'll I know where you're going with this, and we're going to come to that in a sec. John, when I heard this, the description of Syntax and how dominant they've become in terms of all these major files that are coming to City Hall, I couldn't help but thinking of what I'm hearing out of Queen's Park, right? That there's this, Doug Ford's got this skills development program, which is a big pot of money. But one of the elements of it was that the firms that are doing the best in terms of receiving funds out of the fund are those that have gone through the preferred lobbyist companies. So one of them that was named was like Rubicon Strategies, which is Corey Tenike. Mm-hmm. And so, apparently, you go through Corey Tenike, and statistically, you're likely to get more money out of this fund. So is there a parallel to that here in Ottawa?
No, I think that's pretty much a scandal right now at Queen's Park. There was an Auditor General report and great news reporting down there in the Queen's Park kind of bureaus as well, that talked about how political staff were actually selecting winners of contracts for the Skills Development Fund. But as you say, Neil, reporting has also shown that consultants with close connections to the Premier won their clients those big contracts. I know in this case, the Syntax connection lobbying on behalf of Taggart, which is trying to dispose of land, and the city could be a buyer. And I was joking, I think before the pod, maybe that connection actually can get the city a good deal on the land. But I mean, who are we kidding?
That's how that usually works.
Yeah. Taggart, but, we talk about the Syntax connection to Mark Sutcliffe, but Taggart, as Joanne said, has used Syntax prior to Sutcliffe, and Taywin is the big one. I remember when Taywin came on the radar, it was Syntax that reached out on behalf of like Algonquins of Ontario, right, and the Taggart group to start doing interviews with the press and also getting out the word to the public. So they've been around for a while. And it's not just Taggart too. They represent, I think Carpro BIA had some lobbying stuff happening at City Hall. But the battery storage system, of course, I think we might have just talked about that. Some other developers, interestingly, in the Greater Ottawa Home Builders, they represented them with some lobbying files at City too. So they've been in many places, but certainly the big files right now, the landfill and Taywin, they've been part of.
Okay, so Joanne, last question to you. And there was one item that came out of this story that kind of surprised all of us. So why don't you tell us about that?
So there's just one line in Kate's story, and I think it surprised her too, because I know Kate, of course, and it was, I think Kate had asked do you think this is a conflict given your close ties? And she said, no, it isn't. Oh, and I think she said, we are following all the rules. We're bringing this item of public interest to the mayor's office. And so Kate said, well, given that the election is starting, the election season is pretty much on 48 weeks as of yesterday. She said, are you going to be working on the mayor's campaign next year? And she said, haven't really thought about that yet, but she says, in fact, I haven't even ruled out running myself. So this is Jennifer Stewart. I feel like I usually know the scuttlebutt, what's happening on the ground for the election campaign. So that was a huge surprise to me. And I noted that in the various chat groups that I'm in, that people said, oh, maybe Jennifer Stewart's going to run for city council. And that would be where Clark Kelly's ward is now. If she was running locally, I don't know if she is, but I thought that is an interesting thing to note.
Yeah, you don't make casual comments like that, particularly when you're moving in these sort of circles, right?
And when you own a big consulting firm, a firm that's becoming quite powerful in town.
Yeah. Okay. That has been that's it for this week. Actually, I haven't broached this with the two of you, but will we be back on Friday? I think we've got transit committee coming up today.
Yeah, transit's going on right now as we record it.
That's right. Yeah. So we will be back in a few days' time. Until then, I want to thank you both. I want to thank all of our listeners for joining us, and we will see you at the end of the week. This has been the Better Ottawa Municipal Panel.